Hello.
This call is being recorded.
Yeah, gang, it's Mark Barsotti back with science fiction writer called FILIPPO on part 2 of our interview, and we had to cut off due to some technical difficulties while talking about your latest novel, Vanjie's Ghost. Can you just touch on again a little bit about how her power almost unconsciously kind of corrupts her as the novel moves along?
Well, it was kind of a character arc and a plot development that I had in mind. Is that I thought also that by introducing her as a very helpless, naive, beset youngster, and her power kind of makes more trouble for her than it makes benefits, I thought that would bring the reader on board with empathizing with her. And then, as she kind of turned into this massive supervillain, the reader would not lose his or her empathy and identification with Vanjie, but might stick along for the ride and say, well, she's doing some really horrible things now, but I could see it in myself or in others that
Sure.
whatever kind of baseline of virtue you started out with, having these tremendous powers would corrupt it, and you could kind of rationalize doing all these bad things. So that was part of the deal, was that the reader would be kind of tantalized or seduced into empathizing with Vanjie, and then stick along for the rest of the time when she became kind of like this mega villain of the universe.
Yeah, I really never took her as a supervillain, particularly since she was facing someone even worse. I guess it's all relative. It's all relative, yeah. Right? But she certainly did. Not never lose my sympathy, but became aware that she was.
She had overstepped a few lines and boundaries.
Right, and I was going to say too. I think as a redemptive arc, a lot of writers would have provided both Vanjie in particular and I don't want to say too more without getting into spoiler territory, but more of a feel good, happy ending. Readers do tend to love those. I have a theory about your writing that you often subvert readers' expectations, or maybe, I don't know, turn them inside out. However outlandish. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's pretty accurate, I would think, Mark. What's the codicil there you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say, and kind of as a subtext to that, however outlandish the science fiction trappings, your characters rarely get, quote, what's coming to them, end quote, as opposed to the more random happenstance of real life. And they're often grounded in not pessimism so much, but the awareness that, to quote Damon Runyon, all life is 6 to 5 against.
Yes,
I think that unspoken buzzword alert here, but that unspoken worldview is an aspect that elevates your writing, while maybe contributing to selling, I don't know, maybe to selling less copies.
Sure. Well, it's absolutely true. I write, to be out there and communicate with others, but I've got to keep myself fascinated by what I'm doing, or else it's going to be a long and lonely slog through the day-to-day, prose factory here. So I'm naturally an optimistic person, but I'm also kind of a
realist.
Realist, kind of a pint-sized Voltaire, who would present his characters with these horrible doings in Candide that they had to either they gave up or learned to kind of smile through them. So that kind of strange mix. It's funny that you would mention that, because I don't know if you saw just yesterday, I believe, in the New York Times, they had a great article about this kind of fiction that started in Japan and Korea, and I'm at my computer, I'm going to get the exact name for you now, because I don't want to misquote it, but it's basically feel-good fiction of like a magnitude that has never been seen before. So it's become a best-selling.
How is that expressed? I mean, everything's coming up roses.
Yeah, it's. Let me see if I can summon this up now. It should take just a second. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So New York Times headline: in tumultuous times, readers turn to "quote unquote" healing fiction.
Yeah, because I see that story. But
yeah. Cozy, whimsical novels, often featuring magical cats, that have long been popular in Japan and Korea, are taking off globally. Fans say they offer comfort during a chaotic time. So, if that is the kind of thing that people need as a lifeline, I mean, it's whatever floats your boat, whatever gets you through the night, as John Lennon said. But it's just not something that I could envision writing. Although
yeah.
some of my novels have come, or short stories have come a little close to that.
Sure.
Because I mean that's a natural instinct, for writers and humanity in general, is we like to see a happy ending now and then, but kind of an earned happy ending, not one distributed by a magical cat in a tea house,
Well, if I could just get my damn cats to unleash share their magic with me.
Right. There you go. So anyhow, yeah, I just can't. And on the other hand, I've read plenty of classics and plenty of contemporary SF that. The grim, dark fantasies and the bleak dystopias and stuff. And all right, I'll buy into it for the duration of the reading experience, but I just can't get into it as a worldview, as you say. It doesn't conform with my own experiences or wants or hopes. So I think we're all just trapped in by the way we evolved, into adult personalities as to how we express ourselves. It's funny, I was thinking when the Nobel Prize was announced, every time the Nobel Prize for Literature comes out, it's like Hannah Kierkegaard is known for her scathing, bleak landscapes of the moral interior of Laplanders, and then it goes on, and I think that everyone in the world would be startled, and this the Nobel Prize people probably came closest to this by giving the prize to Dylan. What if the Nobel Prize people said, we are happy to give the award this year to G.A. Soames. She is known for her laugh-out-loud comedic novels that depict humanity in all its wise buffoonery, and they leave people appreciating the sheer slapstick of the universe. I guess, you mentioned Vonnegut earlier. He was probably the closest along those dimensions. He never won a Nobel, but he was, highly respected, and some of his works entered into the canon. And I'd rather be Vonnegut, than some of these. The British had a great term for this. I don't know if it's so much use in the USA anymore. They called such writers miserable lists. And it's like I don't want to be a miserable list. I'd rather be more of a Vonnegut type figure and try to offer some comedic perspective on life and a little humor, even if it's wry and satirical.
Right, and Vonnegut, of course, achieved the broader cultural his career hurdled the the cultural barrier where he was no longer a science fiction writer. He was
Sure.
He was serious literature because,
Yeah.
15 million college kids can't be wrong with the
Sure. Well,
And
one thing. Oh, sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, going back to the worldview thing, I didn't mean to give anybody who hasn't read you before the impression that you're all gloom and doom. There's just an element of the real world infuses even the most outlandish tales.
Like, for instance,
settings.
Yeah, I wrote a story called. It was a post-apocalypse story. No humans were left alive. It was just robots. So right away, that sounds like a pretty grim situation.
I think I may be quoting that later in this interview, but go ahead.
No way. That's great. Yeah, but the robots are addicted to old vinyl records. And
yep.
Yeah, that's the story. It's called Providence. But in any case, so there's a really dismal scenario. Post-apocalypse, humanity's extinct. But then you've got kind of a comedic kicker, and yet, the seesaw is going up and down during the story. Is this tragic? Is it comedic? And I think there's a famous Woody Allen quote, when you're doing comedy, you're sitting at the kids' table. And that's always been, for good or ill, reasonably or not, I think that's always been the main feeling of readers and critics and judges and stuff, is that comedy is somehow working on a lower level than the miserablest stuff, and so it doesn't get as much respect or awards or anything. So,
and and just as a devil's advocate, I think you could argue that the reverse is true, because all you have to do is take a picture out your front door to make people miserable. It's a lot harder to make people laugh.
Right, exactly. So, and
anyway, go ahead.
No, I totally agree.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to mention. So even after what I thought was 3 decades, but I guess you showed your first story in the '77, and then started selling regularly in the mid '80s. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Your output is still fairly prolific. Your recent short story collection, Starfields, and that's available on Amazon too, right?
Yep.
That Starfields by FILIPPO. But all 19 stories in Starfields were written between, I checked it last night, I believe it's correct, and there's not, again, it's 19 stories, between 2016 and 2023. You don't seem to be running out of ideas.
I don't, I work slower. That's, even though it seems productive from maybe the reader end, to me, I am such an aged slacker. Everything seems to take longer, and I don't come a little hotter. But you gotta press through that, and hopefully the wisdom and experience will carry you through. And so I still do the short story mode is where I started out. I've still got a huge love of that medium, and I try to do more novels because they get your name out there a little more than the short stories seem kind of evanescent. They're on the newsstands, whether virtual or real, for like a month, and then they disappear, and the next flock of stories arrive. So I try to do more novels, but short stories will always draw me. I wrote a new Ribofunk story. One of my collections is called Ribofunk. It's all stories centered on biological engineering, and I wrote a new one of those not too long ago, and revisiting that future history was kind of fun, exciting, and I remembered doing all the original ones, and hopefully the new one is up to snuff. And so I think I'm midway prolific. I mean, we've seen people who have like Adrian Tchaikovsky, a very good, excellent writer. He'll have 2 novels and a novella come out in the space of a year. It's like, man, I can't do that.
Yeah. You're not Stephen King prolific.
Right. Stephen King, obviously the most famous, although he's slowed down too, due to sheer age. And then you have people like Ted Chiang, they do a story every 2 years or whatever, and that's not me either. But yeah, I think I'm midway prolific. But I'm always berating myself, like, man, you nail your ass to the chair and get some stuff done today.
Okay. Well, speaking of ideas, your 1990 story, One Night in Television City, famously featured a loudmouth New York real estate developer named Donald Trump as president of the United States.
There you go.
So should we blame you or Vanjie for sending us into the idiocracy timeline?
I know. I'm taking all the blame, but only if I get credit as a Cassandra or prophet. Like, I want people to acknowledge my prophecy skills. Actually, that's about the only score that I've ever made in terms of
predictive powers,
science fiction prophecy. Yeah, and that's the very first story in the Ribofunk collection. And when I was casting about, for this future timeline, I said, well, man, politics is going from bad to worse. Who the heck could I nominate for a future president that is so unlikely? And of course, he had a high profile then. It was always in the gossip columns and featured in People magazine and stuff. And I said, well, this guy Trump, I don't know if he's got any political ambitions, but he seems like the kind of disruptive, loudmouth guy who might make a good kind of farcical president. So yeah, I'm both responsible and to be praised for my advance warning that nobody heeded.
Yeah, well, I will mention briefly that I believe he gets assassinated in a story, but enough said about that. We don't want the Secret Service to come after us.
Yes.
I would just say last thing on that point. Science fiction has certainly had its share of dystopian despots, but nobody could have dreamed up a lifelong Manhattan Syriot, reborn as a right-wing Huey Long by way of Dice Clay. You don't need to comment on that because people with red hair, buy books too. Let's talk a little bit about your prose. It varies naturally, but probably my fave among your autorial voices relies on tech-heavy sort of, neon cyberpunk word riffs, and I'm quoting now.
Yeah.
The woman pumped up with printed muscles wore a form-fitting second skin whose jade-colored, smart, defensive exoscales caused her to resemble some giant bipedal Gila monster. And another quote coming up here. In the inferno of descending zumps and wobbles, crisscross crashers and domino delacers, unzippers and unbraiders, castle knobs, forest grom, went up in a seething boil of hot atoms right down to its deep roots. That stuff to me is almost akin to jazz scatting.
Mm-hmm.
That type of prose, and again, it doesn't appear in all your stories, but does that just kind of come pouring out of you at the typewriter, or is it crafted carefully word by word, or does it vary?
I think that those quotes you cited are like the core of science fiction, when it's not only blowing your mind with concepts, but it's doing it verbally or linguistically in a way that really drives home the weirdness of it all. And so I love writing that kind of stuff. I haven't, there's a bit of it in the new Ribofunk story that I alluded to, but I used to do it more often. It's hard to get that kind of jazz scatting, techno speak going. So it does require a little more work. I love doing it. I probably, your praise of it is making me long to do it some more, because I wrote this new Ribofunk story maybe 2 years ago. So it's been a while since I've tackled that kind of writing. But I think, and you can encounter it, obviously I'm not unique in this, but I mean, you can be reading some passage in a Greg Bear or Stephen Baxter novel, and it's like your head is exploding because there's so many concepts coming at you, and they're also embodied in this very kind of techno poetry, And I think obviously one of the big milestones in this, although it's not technical so much as cultural, is Clockwork Orange. You know, when you read Clockwork Orange, it's just like, okay, I know this is a really weird future because it's coming at me in language that, like, I don't even recognize. So, yeah, that kind of Clockwork Orange, blow your mind language is something I love to do.
Yeah. And we've touched on this a little bit, but there are strains of humor throughout your work, even in the darkest of stories.
All right, gang, that's going to wrap up part 3 of my conversation with Paul DeFilippo. Hope you enjoyed that. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. And if you don't read science fiction personally, but you have friends, relatives that do, hop on your local Amazon and check out, maybe buy 1 or 2 of Paul's books as presents. As I've said before, if the recipients do not like those, send them back to Paul and he'll pay double your money back. I tell him I said that. So with that, again, happy Thanksgiving. Like and subscribe, blah, blah, blah. See you next time.